A mail-order bride is rejected for being too good, humiliated in front of the whole town. The church bell tolls, dust swirls in the street, and whispers cut sharper than a knife. She's left standing alone, her Bible clutched tight, her future in ruins. But just when hope fades, a quiet cowboy steps forward. A man of few words, with eyes full of loss, and a heart no one thought still beat. He offers her shelter, but taking his hand means facing the town's gossip, the banker's schemes, and a lie so dangerous it could cost them both everything. She was called too proper for the West, yet the children see her as the only teacher who ever believed in them. And when forged papers accuse her of a shameful past, the whole valley must decide, will they bury her in scandal or stand with her in truth? In a land where pride can ruin a man and lies can steal his land, can a quiet cowboy's courage and a rejected bride's faith prove that being too good is exactly what the West needs? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the San Miguel train platform as dust settled in the wake of the locomotive's arrival. Sasha Bethany's heart thundered in her chest, matching the rhythm of the steam engine's dying hiss. She smoothed her gray traveling dress with one gloved hand while clutching her worn carpet bag and beloved Bible with the other. Through the window, she could see townspeople gathering, their faces a blur of curiosity and expectation. Ladies in their best day dresses fanned themselves against the heat, while men in work clothes and Sunday suits alike craned their necks to catch a glimpse of the arriving mail-order brides. Sasha took a deep breath, whispering a quiet prayer. "Lord, guide my steps." The conductor helped her down onto the wooden platform, her boots making a hollow sound that seemed to echo in her ears. The crowd parted and she searched the faces before her, looking for the man who would be her husband. Edward Garrison stepped forward, his expensive boots clicking against the planks. He cut an imposing figure in his tailored suit, but his eyes were cold as they swept over her from head to toe. Sasha's smile faltered as he frowned, his mouth twisting into a dismissive sneer. "This won't do at all," he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. Look at her, too refined, too educated. She'd wilt like a hothouse flower in the harsh ranch life. He turned to address the crowd directly. "I ask for a practical woman, not some Boston finishing school graduate." The words struck Sasha like physical blows. Heat rushed to her cheeks as titters and whispers rippled through the gathered townspeople. A woman in widow's black shook her head, clicking her tongue in sympathy that felt more like judgment. Near the edge of the platform, a group of children, some fair-haired, others with darker complexions revealing their mixed heritage, pointed and whispered behind their hands. "But sir," Sasha managed, her voice barely steady, "I assure you I'm willing to learn." "To work hard? No." Edward cut her off sharply. "I won't waste time teaching someone who clearly belongs in a city parlor. Good day, Miss Bethany." With that, he turned on his heel and strode away, leaving Sasha standing alone with her meager belongings. The crowd began to disperse, some still chuckling, others averting their eyes in second-hand embarrassment. Sasha's legs trembled beneath her skirts, but she forced herself to stand straight, even as tears threatened to spill. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break down. The sun dipped lower, painting the dusty street in amber and purple shadows. The station master was beginning to close up for the day, casting uncertain glances in her direction. Sasha's mind raced. She had spent nearly all her savings on the train ticket. Believing Edward's promises of a secure home and honest marriage, she drew in a shaky breath and whispered another prayer. "Lord, I trusted in your guidance to bring me here. Please don't forsake me now." The sound of boots and the soft nickering of a horse made her look up. A tall man in worn working clothes led a sturdy bay horse toward the platform. Unlike the others, His expression held no mockery, only a quiet gravity that somehow made her stand a little straighter. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice low and gentle. "I'm Christian Boone." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair and eyes that looked directly into hers without flinching. That display just now, it wasn't right. Sasha clutched her Bible closer. "Thank you, Mr. Boone. Bye." Her voice caught as she tried to maintain her composure. A man's character shows in how he treats others. Christian continued, still holding his hat. "Garrison showed his true nature today, and it ain't a flattering sight." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "My ranch is a few miles outside town. Got a spare room in the house. It's simple, but clean. You'd be welcome to stay until you sort things out." The children who had been watching drew closer, their earlier whispers turning to interest. One small girl with long dark braids spoke up. "Mr. Boone is good people, miss. He helped my mama when our roof leaked last winter." Christian's ears reddened slightly at the child's words, but he kept his steady gaze on Sasha. "There's proper locks on the doors, and I'll sleep in the barn. No one in town would think ill of you. They know me." Sasha studied him, reading the truth in his weathered face. Here was a man offering help with no expectation, showing more Christian charity than those who had laughed at her predicament. Still, she hesitated. "I wouldn't want to impose ... No imposition," he said simply. "Just wouldn't sit right, leaving you stranded here. Got a wagon just around the corner. If you'd care to ride instead of walk." The station master was now turning down the lamps, casting meaningful looks their way. The children had gathered in a small cluster, watching the exchange with open curiosity. Sasha realized she had little choice but more than that. She felt a quiet assurance that this was, perhaps, the answer to her prayers, though not in the way she had expected. "You're very kind, Mr. Boone," she said finally. "I would be grateful for the shelter, just until I can make other arrangements." He nodded once, then turned to the children. "Tommy, would you help carry the lady's bag to my wagon? And Sarah, run tell your ma that Miss Bethany will be staying at my place for a spell that'll help quiet any gossip before it starts." The children scattered to their tasks, eager to be useful. Christian offered his arm to help Sasha down from the platform, his calloused hand steady and respectful. As they walked toward his wagon, the last rays of sunlight caught the cross she wore at her throat, making it gleam briefly like a promise. Behind them, the train whistle sounded in the distance, carrying away the future she had imagined and replacing it with something uncertain, but perhaps, she thought as she watched Christian carefully stow her carpetbag, something truer than what she had left behind. The whispers of the townsfolk hung in the air like the dust from the departing train. Christian Boone stood quietly beside his horse, his weathered hat in his hands, watching as Sasha gathered her composure. The setting sun painted the western sky in shades of amber and purple, casting long shadows across the wooden platform. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice barely carrying above the evening breeze, "do you have somewhere to go for the night?" Sasha's fingers tightened around her Bible as she shook her head, struggling to maintain her dignity. "No, Mr. Boone, I'm afraid I don't." Christian nodded thoughtfully, his eyes scanning the dispersing crowd. Several townspeople lingered, watching the exchange with poorly concealed interest. Mrs. Peterson, the milliner's wife, whispered behind her hand to Mrs. Thompson, both women's eyes sharp with speculation. "I've got a line shack," Christian offered, his words measured and careful. "It's simple, but clean. You're welcome to stay until you sort things out." He paused, then added, "There's a proper lock on the door. And I'll bed down in the barn." A few gasps rippled through the remaining onlookers. Mrs. Peterson's eyebrows shot up toward her hairline, and Mr. Jenkins, the general store owner, shook his head with obvious disapproval. Christian paid them no mind. His attention focused solely on the stranded woman before him, Sasha straightened her shoulders, weighing her options. The sun was setting, and she had nowhere else to turn. "You're very kind, Mr. Boone. I would be grateful for the shelter." Christian reached for her carpetbag. "Allow me, ma'am." His movements were deliberate and respectful as he secured her belongings to his saddle. The bay horse stood patiently, its coat gleaming in the fading light. With gentle hands, he helped Sasha mount, making sure her skirts were properly arranged. The townsfolk's murmurs grew louder, but Christian's expression remained impassive as he took the reins and led his horse away from the platform. They followed a narrow trail that wound through scrubby mesquite and patches of prairie grass. The evening air carried the scent of sage and sun-warmed earth. Sasha sat straight in the saddle, her hands folded primly in her lap. "Mr. Boone," she ventured after several minutes of silence, "might I ask how long you've lived in these parts?" Christian walked steadily beside the horse, his boots raising small puffs of dust. "Going on 15 years now, and you raise cattle?" "Yes, ma'am." "Got a small herd?" "Enough to get by." Sasha watched his profile in the deepening twilight. "Do you work the ranch alone?" A shadow passed across his features. "I did have help. My wife, Sarah." He paused, his voice growing softer. "Lost her 3 winters back to fever." "I'm so sorry," Sasha said quietly, understanding now the depth of solitude she glimpsed in his eyes. Christian nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy without inviting more questions. "Prefer the quiet now," he said simply. "Just me and the cattle on the range." They crested a small rise, and Sasha saw the line shack nestled against a stand of cottonwoods. A creek whispered nearby, its banks lined with willows that swayed in the evening breeze. The structure was modest but well maintained, with a small covered porch and a tin roof that gleamed dully in the last light. Christian helped her dismount, then led his horse to a rough-hewn hitching post. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, gesturing toward the door. "I'll tend to the horse and bring in your bag." Sasha climbed the 2 wooden steps to the porch, her skirts rustling against the weathered boards. The door opened with a slight creak, revealing a spare but tidy interior. A pot-bellied stove occupied one corner, while a narrow cot with a clean blanket stood against the opposite wall. A simple table with 2 chairs sat beneath a small window, and a row of hooks on the wall held various tools and cooking implements. Christian entered a few moments later, setting her carpetbag carefully by the cot. Without a word, he moved to the stove and began preparing for their evening meal. He worked efficiently, measuring beans into a pot and adding water from a ceramic jug. Sasha remained standing, her hands clasped before her. "Thank you, Mr. Boone. Your kindness means more than I can express." He glanced up briefly from his task. "Ain't right. Leaving someone with nowhere to go." The words were few, but they carried the weight of genuine conviction as Christian tended to the beans. Sasha took in more details of her temporary sanctuary. A shelf held a few books, their spines well worn. A small mirror hung near the door, its surface slightly clouded with age. Everything spoke of simplicity and utility, but also of care. This was a place that, though humble, was respected by its owner. The beans began to simmer, filling the small space with their homely aroma. Christian added a pinch of salt and stirred the pot with practiced movements. Sasha folded her hands in her lap, bowing her head slightly in silent gratitude for the meal, for shelter, for this quiet man's unexpected mercy. Night settled fully around the line shack, bringing with it the wild chorus of the prairie. Crickets chirped their evening songs, and in the distance, coyotes began their mournful howling. The sound sent a shiver down Sasha's spine, making her acutely aware of her isolation and vulnerability. Christian seemed to sense her unease. "They won't come near," he assured her, his voice low and steady, "just making their nightly rounds." After their simple supper, Christian gathered his bedroll. "I'll be in the barn if you need anything." Door locks from the inside. He paused at the threshold. Rest well, Miss Bethany. Left alone, Sasha changed into her nightgown and laid down on the narrow cot. The blanket was rough but clean, smelling faintly of sunshine and prairie wind. Outside, the coyotes continued their wild serenade, their voices rising and falling like eerie music. She pulled her Bible close to her chest and closed her eyes. "Dear Lord," she whispered into the darkness, "grant me courage for whatever path you've set before me. And thank you for sending Mr. Boone to help a stranger in need." The creek's gentle murmur mingled with the night sounds, creating a strange lullaby. Sasha lay awake for a long time, her mind full of the day's events, the public humiliation at the train station, the townspeople's judgmental stares, and the unexpected kindness of a quiet widower who preferred the company of cattle to people in the barn. Christian settled onto his own bedroll, listening to the familiar night sounds of his land. He thought of the woman in his lined shack, her dignity in the face of cruelty, and felt a stirring of something he hadn't experienced in years, a need to protect, to shelter someone besides himself. He pushed the feeling aside, reminding himself that this was temporary. Come morning, they would need to figure out what came next. Morning sunlight streamed through the small window of the lined shack, casting golden squares across the rough-hewn floorboards. Sasha blinked awake, taking a moment to remember where she was. The cot creaked softly as she rose, smoothing her wrinkled traveling dress with careful hands. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. A lady maintains her standards, no matter her circumstances. Following this long-ingrained wisdom, Sasha folded the wool blanket with precise corners, then reached for her carpet bag. Among her few possessions was a small tin of precious tea leaves, wrapped carefully in cloth. Christian's boots scraped against the porch outside, and he entered with an armload of kindling. He paused, watching as Sasha measured tea leaves into the battered pot she'd found on his shelf. "Ain't necessary to go to such trouble," he said. But his eyes lingered on the neat arrangement she'd made of his sparse belongings. "It's no trouble at all, Mr. Boone." Sasha's voice was gentle but firm. "Please, join me if you'd like." They shared the tea in quiet companionship, steam rising from tin cups as the sun climbed higher. Christian said little, but his appreciation showed in the careful way he handled the cup she'd prepared for him. "I need to ride into town for supplies," he said finally, setting down his empty cup. "You're welcome to come along. Get your bearings." Sasha's hands tightened slightly around her cup. The thought of facing the townspeople made her stomach clench, but she couldn't hide forever. "Yes, thank you. I should." The ride into San Miguel was different in daylight. Sasha noticed details she'd missed in yesterday's turmoil, the weathered false fronts of the buildings, the hitching posts worn smooth by years of use, the general store's faded sign creaking in the morning breeze as Christian helped her down from his horse. She felt the weight of watching eyes. Two women standing near the millinery shop bent their heads together, whispering behind gloved hands. A man loading crates at the feed store paused in his work, his gaze following them down the street. The bell above the general store door jangled as they entered. Mr. Jenkins looked up from his ledger, his friendly shopkeeper's smile faltering slightly when he saw them. Christian moved toward the back of the store, making his way through the narrow aisles with familiar purpose. Sasha stood near the front counter, examining a display of lamp wicks with more attention than they deserved. Behind her, she heard the rustle of skirts and lowered voices. Living under a man's roof, and him a widower, abandoned bride. They're calling her, what must her people back east think? Each whispered word stung. But Sasha kept her chin high, remembering her mother's lessons. Dignity, she'd always said, is armor against cruelty. She selected a lampwick with steady hands, then moved to examine the shelf of preserved goods. Christian appeared at her elbow, his arms full of supplies, coffee, flour, salt, pork. His presence seemed to quiet the whispers, though she could still feel the weight of stares. He laid his items on the counter, then looked at her questioningly. "Just this?" "Please," she said, placing the lamp wick alongside his purchases. He nodded, counting out coins from a worn leather purse. The rest of the week passed in a blur of small adjustments. Sasha found comfort in creating order within the line shack's humble confines. Christian spent his days tending to his cattle, returning at dusk to find his home transformed in subtle ways, a fresh sprig of wildflowers in a tin can. His few books arranged neatly, the windows gleaming. Sunday morning dawned clear and cool. Sasha dressed with extra care in her best dress, the blue cotton smoothed free of wrinkles. The small mirror reflected her determined expression as she pinned her hair neatly. Beneath her hat, the church was a simple white-painted building with a modest steeple. Sasha slipped into a back pew just as the service was beginning, keeping her eyes forward as other parishioners turned to look. The familiar rhythms of worship soothed her spirit until she heard Edward Garrison's voice carrying from several rows ahead. ... wanted someone practical. "You understand," he was saying to his companions. "A woman who knows ranch work, not some delicate schoolmarm with fancy Eastern ways." Sasha's hands clenched in her lap, her knuckles white against the dark blue of her skirt. The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. Edward had never intended to love her, to know her heart or mind. She had been meant only as a convenience, a worker to fit his needs. The minister's words about God's love and mercy washed over her, but Sasha barely heard them through the roaring in her ears. When the final hymn ended, she remained seated, letting others file out ahead of her. Finally, she stepped into the morning sunlight, blinking against sudden tears. There, at the bottom of the church steps, stood Christian Boone. He was holding the reins of his bay horse, his Sunday best coat slightly ill-fitting on his broad shoulders. When he saw her, he simply nodded, gesturing toward the saddle. That silent offer of support, asking nothing, demanding nothing, steadied her heart. Sasha walked down the steps with measured grace, accepting his help onto the horse. As they rode away from the church, she felt the curious gazes of the congregation following them. They seemed less important now. The morning air was sweet with prairie grass and distant sage. Christian walked beside the horse, his stride easy and unhurried. He didn't ask about her tears, didn't press for explanations. His quiet presence was like a shelter, reminding her that dignity could survive rejection. That worth wasn't measured by another's limited vision. They rode in companionable silence, the sound of hoofbeats and stirrup leather creating a gentle rhythm. Sasha looked out over the vast expanse of prairie, seeing it differently now. This wasn't just a place of isolation and hardship. It was a place where truth showed itself plainly, where a person's real character emerged in the face of adversity. The line shack came into view, its modest shape a welcome sight. Christian helped her down from the horse, his calloused hands careful and respectful. For a moment, their eyes met, and Sasha saw in his steady gaze something she hadn't found in Edward's calculating assessment. Simple human kindness, offered without expectation or demand. "Thank you, Mr. Boone," she said softly, meaning far more than just the ride. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture both courtly and humble. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. And in those two words, she heard understanding of all she hadn't said. The evening sun cast long shadows across the line shack's weathered porch as Christian's horse approached. Sasha looked up from her mending, noting the troubled set of his shoulders as he dismounted. Something was wrong. "Evening, Miss Bethany," he said, removing his hat. Trail dust coated his clothes, and worry lines creased his weathered face. He settled heavily onto the porch step beside her, his usual quiet deeper than normal. "Did something happen in town?" Sasha set aside her sewing, concern rising at his expression. Christian ran a hand through his hair, sighing. Had a visit from Mr. Haskett, the banker. He paused, choosing his words carefully. He's been spreading talk about ... About us. About you staying here. Sasha's hands twisted in her lap. What kind of talk? He's claiming your presence here is ... Christian's jaw tightened. That it's improper. Says it's tarnishing my reputation. He looked out across the prairie, his voice dropping lower. He mentioned my grazing rights could be at risk if the court believes there's any experiency subtoge. The weight of his words settled like lead in Sasha's stomach. Grazing rights meant everything to a cattleman. Without them, Christian would lose his livelihood. And it would be her fault. "Oh, Mr. Boone," she whispered, "I never meant to cause such trouble. After you showed me such kindness, ... Her voice caught. Perhaps I should leave, find somewhere else. No. The word came sharp and quick. Christian turned to face her, his eyes intense. I don't regret offering you shelter, Miss Bethany. Couldn't have left you alone that day? Wouldn't have been right. Sasha blinked back tears at his simple declaration. They sat in silence as the sun slipped lower, casting the prairie grass in gold. Finally, Christian stood, brushing dust from his trousers. I'll get supper started, he said, his usual quiet manner returning. They shared a simple stew that evening, the lamplight casting warm shadows on the cabin walls. Though few words passed between them, Sasha felt a deeper understanding growing, a shared determination to face whatever. Came. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Sasha had awakened early, an idea taking shape in her mind. After breakfast, she walked to the church, where Pastor Willard was sweeping the steps. "Good morning, Miss Bethany," he called, pausing his work. His kind eyes crinkled with welcome. "What brings you by so early?" "Pastor Willard," she began, "I was wondering, might I use the church corner for teaching? There are children in town who could benefit from some schooling." The pastor leaned on his broom, considering. "Many have tried before," he said gently. "Some folks here, well, they have strong opinions about who deserves teaching. All children deserve to learn," Sasha replied firmly. "All of them." Pastor Willard smiled, nodding slowly. "The church corner is yours, Miss Bethany. God's house welcomes everyone." That afternoon, Sasha arranged borrowed benches in the shaded corner of the churchyard. She had only her Bible and a slate, but it was enough to begin. At first, just two children came: a shy mestizo girl named Maria and her younger brother Pablo. They sat carefully on the bench, watching Sasha with uncertain eyes. "Would you like to learn your letters?" Sasha asked warmly, showing them the slate. Maria nodded, her small hand reaching tentatively for the chalk dot. As the days passed, more children began appearing. Tommy, whose mother was Apache, brought his cousins. Then came the Watson twins, whose clothes were patched but clean. Soon, a small group gathered each afternoon. Eager faces turned toward Sasha as she taught reading numbers and Bible verses. Some townspeople passed by with disapproving glances, muttering about mixing children who shouldn't mix. But Sasha kept teaching, her gentle voice carrying across the churchyard as she helped small hands form letters and sound out words. One afternoon, she looked up to see Christian watching from across the street. He stood in the shadow of the general store, his expression thoughtful as he observed the children clustered around her. Their eyes met briefly, and he touched his hat brim in greeting before moving on. Life settled into a rhythm. Mornings found Sasha tidying the line shack while Christian rode out to his cattle. Afternoons were filled with the children's eager voices at the church corner. Evenings brought quiet meals shared in companionable silence. Broken only by the clink spring had draped San Miguel Valley in a tapestry of wildflowers, their yellow and purple heads bobbing in the warm breeze. At the church corner, where Sasha's makeshift school had taken root, morning sunlight spilled across the weathered benches where her young pupils gathered each day. Christian dismounted from his horse, tools jingling in his saddlebag. He'd noticed the wobbly benches yesterday while riding past, and something had compelled him to return with hammer and nails. Now, watching Sasha arrange her teaching materials, he cleared his throat softly. "Morning, Miss Bethany. Thought them benches could use some attention." Sasha turned, surprise brightening her face. "Mr. Boone. I didn't expect, ... She gestured to the tilting seats. "That's very kind of you." The children began arriving as Christian knelt beside the first bench. Maria and Pablo came first, followed by the Watson twins and Tommy with his cousins. They gathered around Christian, fascinated by his work. "Can I help, Mr. Boone?" Tommy asked, bouncing on his toes. Christian's usually stern face softened. "Reckon you can hold these nails for me?" He placed a few in the boy's eager palm. Laughter bubbled up as Christian worked, the children clustering close to watch. When the hammer slipped and he muttered, "Oh, fiddlesticks," they dissolved into giggles. Even Sasha's musical laugh joined the chorus, making Christian's ears turn pink. "Mr. Boone says, fiddlesticks," Pablo announced, delighted by this discovery about the quiet rancher. Now, Sasha gently chided, though her eyes sparkled. "Let's show respect for Mr. Boone's kind help." The morning passed in pleasant industry. Christian moved from bench to bench, straightening legs and tightening joints. Between tasks, he caught glimpses of Sasha teaching. Her patience seemed endless as she guided small hands over letters, her voice warm and encouraging. Something in his chest tightened, watching her, a feeling he'd thought long buried with his. Wife Sunday brought the whole town to church, the chapel filled with rustling skirts and pressed suits. Christian sat in his usual back pew, but today Sasha sat beside him instead of alone. Pastor Willard's sermon spoke of community and helping hands, and more than a few glances turned their way after the service. As folks gathered on the church steps, the usual whispers took on a different tone. Mrs. Watson, watching her twins show Sasha their new copybook, remarked to her neighbor, "That young lady's got a gift with children." "She surely does." "And Boone," replied Mr. Fuller, nodding to Ward where Christian helped the pastor stack hymnals. "Never knew him to lend a hand before. Kept to himself since Sarah passed." "Perhaps," said Mrs. Watson thoughtfully. "We were hasty in our judgment." The following week brought the Thompson barn raising, a community effort that drew folks from all around. Wagons arrived loaded with food and supplies. Work crews organized themselves, and the sound of hammering filled the air. Sasha had risen before dawn to prepare her contribution. Now she moved among the workers, offering fresh bread and sweet tea. Her carpetbag days seemed far behind as she chatted with ranch wives and helped organize the dinner tables. "These biscuits," Mrs. Fuller exclaimed, taking another. "Light as clouds, Miss Bethany." "My mother's recipe," Sasha replied, pleased. She always said good food brings people together. Meanwhile, Christian worked with the raising crew, his strength and carpentry skills earning appreciation. Men who'd once avoided the quiet widower now called out for his help, included him in their jokes. "Much obliged, Boone," Mr. Thompson said as Christian secured a crucial beam. "Reckon we're blessed to have you here today." Christian nodded, unused to such praise. His eyes found Sasha across the yard where she played pat cake with little Jenny Thompson. The sight warmed him in ways the spring sun couldn't match. As evening approached, families began heading home. Christian helped Sasha into his wagon, careful of her flour-dusted skirts. The ride back to the line shack was peaceful. The valley painted in sunset colors. Over supper, Sasha broke their usual comfortable silence. "Thank you, Mr. Boone, for standing beside me these past weeks. I know it hasn't been easy, with all the talk." Christian set down his coffee cup, considering his words carefully. "Miss Bethany, I should be thanking you." He paused, gathering courage. These past years, since Sarah, well, silence was all I wanted. But now, his voice softened. Now there's life here again. Laughter, it's good. Sasha's eyes shone in the lamplight. I was so afraid when I arrived. Thought God had abandoned me here. But maybe, double quotes. She smiled gently. Maybe he had a different plan. Christian nodded, his heart full of things he couldn't yet express. The lamp cast a warm glow across the table between them, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called. When Sasha laughed at his small joke about Mrs. Fuller's hat, the sound seemed to fill every corner of the shack with light. They lingered over their meal, sharing stories of the day. Christian described Tommy's determination to carry boards twice his size, while Sasha told of teaching the Thompson girls to braid bread dough. Their conversation flowed easier now, comfortable as an old quilt, though beneath it ran a current of something deeper, something tender and unspoken. The evening settled around them like a blessing. Through the window, stars began to pepper the darkening sky, but inside the shack, warmth and contentment reigned. Christian watched Sasha wash the dishes, humming a hymn from Sunday service, and felt peace settle in his bones. This, he realized, was what he'd been missing all those silent years. Not just sound, but harmony. Not just company, but understanding. Sasha dried her hands, turning to find Christian's gaze on her. A blush colored her cheeks, but she didn't look away. In that moment, something shifted between them, subtle as a change in the wind, profound as a prayer answered. The lamplight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, but neither moved to trim it. They sat together in the gentle glow. Two souls who had found in each other something unexpected and precious, the beginning of love. Growing as naturally as spring flowers in the valley below, the morning dawned. Gray and heavy with approaching rain when the letter arrived. Christian stood at his weathered table, reading the official notice with trembling hands. Each word struck like a hammer blow to his heart. Notice of land claim challenge. The document began in stark black ink. Filed by Mr. Theodore Haskett, San Miguel Banking and Trust, citing moral turpitude and improper conduct. The words blurred before his eyes. Anger rose in his chest like a prairie fire. With a sudden burst of rage, Christian slammed the paper down on the table, making the tin cups rattle. Sasha, who had been quietly preparing breakfast, jumped at the sound. "Christian," she asked softly, worry creasing her brow. "What's wrong?" He thrust the paper toward her, too angry to speak. As she read, her face grew pale. Tears welled in her eyes, and her hands began to shake. "Oh no," she whispered. "No, no, .. Her voice caught on a sob. "This is all my fault." Christian paced the small confines of the shack, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "Haskett's been looking for any excuse," he ground out. "Man's had his eye on my grazing rights since before he cut himself off," running a hand through his hair. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the roof. Sasha stood frozen, the paper clutched in her hands. Tears tracking silently down her cheeks. "I never meant to bring such trouble to your door," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Christian couldn't bear to look at her grief. Without another word, he grabbed his hat and duster, striding out into the growing storm. The door closed behind him with a final sounding thud. Days stretched into a week of strained silence. Christian left before dawn each morning, riding out to check his cattle, mending fences, and doing anything to keep his hands busy and his mind from dwelling on the threat to his land. He returned after dark. Eating the supper Sasha left warming on the stove without meeting her eyes. The silence between them grew like a thorny hedge, sharp, with unspoken words and fears. Sasha continued teaching at the church corner, but her usual brightness had dimmed. The children noticed, especially little Tommy, who brought her a handful of wildflowers one morning. "Are you sad, Miss Bethany?" he asked, his young face pinched with concern. Sasha managed a small smile, tucking one of the flowers into her hair. "Sometimes grown-ups have heavy thoughts, Tommy, but God is good, and these flowers are lovely. Thank you." In town, the situation grew worse. Edward Garrison seemed to take particular pleasure in Sasha's distress. One afternoon, as she left the general store with supplies, he blocked her path. "Well, well," he drawled, a cruel smile playing at his lips. "If it isn't the proper Boston lady, brought so low. Living in sin with a dirt-poor rancher, my, how the mighty have fallen." Sasha lifted her chin, though her heart pounded. "Excuse me, Mr. Garrison," she said firmly, trying to step around him. "You know," he continued, his voice carrying to ensure others would hear, "I did you a favor that day at the station. Saved you from having to pretend to be something you're not. Though it seems you found other ways to shame yourself." Several townspeople had stopped to watch. Some looked away uncomfortably, while others whispered behind their hands. Sasha clutched her packages tighter and hurried past, Edward's mocking laughter following her down the street. That evening, as Christian sat at the table eating the stew she'd prepared, Sasha gathered her courage. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "I could leave," she said softly. "Find work in another town, perhaps. Then you wouldn't lose your land because of me." Christian's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. He looked up, and for the first time in days, their eyes met. The pain and conflict in his gaze made her heart ache. But he said nothing, returning to his meal in silence. Sasha turned away, blinking back tears as she busied herself with washing dishes. The quiet between them stretched thin and brittle as spider silk. Outside, a lone coyote called to the rising moon, its cry as lonely as the ache in Sasha's chest. That night, long after Christian had gone to his room, Sasha knelt beside her cot. Her Bible lay open before her, its pages silver in the moonlight streaming through the window. Tears fell onto the well-worn leather as she prayed. "Dear Lord," she whispered, "please show me the path you want me to take. If I should go, give me the strength. If I should stay, ... double quotes. Her voice caught. If I should stay, please help me find the courage to face whatever comes." The night hours crept by as Sasha remained on her knees. Pouring out her heart to God, she prayed for Christian's land, for wisdom to know what to do, for the strength to bear the town's cruel judgment. Most of all, she prayed for the man in the next room, whose kindness had given her shelter, but whose silence now wounded her more deeply than Edward's mockery ever could. Outside, crickets chirped their evening song, and a cool breeze carried the scent of rain-washed sage through the window. The familiar sounds of the range at night, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of cottonwood leaves, the soft hooting of an owl had become dear to her. This place, despite all its hardships, had begun to feel like home. From Christian's room came the sound of restless movement. He wasn't sleeping either, she realized. They were both awake, separated by a thin wall and thick silence, each wrestling with decisions that would change both their lives. Sasha touched the cross hanging at her throat, her mother's partying gift. "Father," she prayed one final time, "whatever happens, let it be according to your will, not mine." The moon continued its arc across the sky, casting shifting shadows through the window. Still, Sasha prayed, her heart heavy with uncertainty. While in the next room, Christian lay awake, his own thoughts as turbulent as the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Dawn painted the eastern sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold when the sound of running feet broke the morning stillness. A young boy, his face flushed from exertion, clutched a yellow telegram envelope as he approached the shack. "Miss Bethany," he called out, rapping on the wooden door. "Telegraph for you." Sasha opened the door, wiping her hands on her apron. The boy, Tommy, from her school corner, thrust the envelope toward her with a gap-toothed grin. "Much obliged." "Tommy," she said softly, pressing a penny into his palm. The boy scampered away, leaving Sasha alone with the telegram. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. The paper crackled as she unfolded it, her eyes scanning the typed words. Tears welled up. But these were different from her recent ones of sorrow. These spoke of relief and vindication. Christian emerged from the barn, his boots dusty from morning chores. He paused at the sight of Sasha standing in the doorway, the telegram trembling in her grasp. "It's from Reverend Matthews," she explained, her voice thick with emotion. "My pastor in Boston." She held the paper out to Christian, who took it with careful hands. The message was clear and direct. "Miss Bethany served our congregation faithfully for 3 years. Character beyond reproach. Excellent teacher of children. Recommend her highly to new husband. God's blessings on your union. Reverend James Matthews, First Church of Boston." Christian read the words twice, his jaw tightening. When he looked up, his eyes held a mixture of relief and bitter resignation. "Good words," he said quietly. "True words. They'll have to believe this," Sasha said, hope lifting her voice. "Surely the town will see truth." Christian's laugh was harsh. When has truth ever stood a chance against what folks want to believe? He handed the telegram back, his movements stiff. "Haskett and his kind, they don't care what's real. They care about what serves their purpose." Sasha's hope dimmed at his words. She folded the telegram carefully, tucking it into her Bible for safekeeping. Christian watched her for a moment, then turned away, heading back to his work without another word. Sunday arrived, clear and bright, but Christian remained in the fields, claiming cattle needed tending. Sasha walked to church alone, her best dress brushing against the morning damp grass. She clutched her Bible close, the telegram still nestled within its pages. The church stood white against the blue sky, small steeple reaching heavenward. Sasha slipped into a back pew as Pastor Willard led the congregation in the opening hymn. The familiar words brought comfort, even as she felt the weight of stares and whispers. After the final amen, as people began to move toward the doors, Mr. Haskett approached. His suit was immaculate, his smile cold as a snake's. He waited until several people were within earshot before speaking. "Miss Bethany," he said, his voice carrying, "or perhaps I should say, Miss Sally Green." Sasha's heart stopped. "I don't understand." Haskett pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Interesting document came across my desk. Employment records from the Red Rose Saloon in Boston." His smile widened as gasps rippled through the lingering congregation. "Seems you're quite familiar with entertaining gentlemen." "That's not true," Sasha whispered, her face draining of color. "I've never. The evidence suggests otherwise." Haskett held up the paper, letting others catch glimpses of official-looking letterhead and signatures. "Quite detailed accounts of your ... activities." Pastor Willard started forward, concern etched on his weathered face. But before he could intervene, the whispers began. They slithered through the church like poison. A saloon girl ... pretending to be respectable ... poor Christian Boone ... no wonder Edward turned her away ... Sasha's legs went weak. The telegram in her Bible seemed to burn against her hands, useless truth against such a perfectly crafted lie. She turned and fled, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor as she ran from the sanctuary that had become a place of judgment. She ran until her sides ached, until the church was far behind. Her feet carried her down familiar paths, past the creek where she sometimes sat to grade papers, past the meadow where Christian's cattle grazed. The sun tracked across the sky as she wandered, unable to face returning to the shack, unable to face what waited in town. Dusk was settling when she finally pushed open the door of the simple cabin that had become her refuge. The familiar scent of wood smoke and leather wrapped around her, but brought no comfort. Her legs gave way, and she sank to the floor beside the cold stove, her tears finally breaking free. The sobs came from deep within, shaking her entire body. They were the cries of a soul, wounded not just by lies, but by the eagerness with which those lies were believed. Her fingers clutched at her mother's cross, seeking comfort in its familiar shape. Lord, she prayed through her tears, how can I bear this? How can I stay strong when everything I am is twisted into something false? Time passed, marked only by her quieting sobs and the deepening shadows. She heard Christian's horse approaching before the door opened, spilling lamplight across the floor. He stood in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the light, taking in the sight of her huddled form. For a long moment, neither spoke. Sasha wiped at her tears with trembling hands, unable to look at him. The weight of Haskett's lies, of the town's judgment, of Christian's potential ruin because of her, pressed down like a physical burden. Christian's boots scraped against the wooden floor as he shifted. She could feel his struggle, the desire to offer comfort warring with his own fears and doubts. Finally, his voice came, rough with emotion, I need air. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Sasha alone in the gathering darkness. Outside, his footsteps crunched against the gravel, fading into the night. She pressed her hands against her mouth, muffling fresh sobs as crickets began their evening song, oblivious to the pain within the small shack's walls. Morning sunlight crept through the small, window of Christian's shack, finding Sasha already awake, her eyes red-rimmed from a night of little sleep. She moved quietly, folding her few belongings and tucking them into her carpet bag. Each item told its own story of hope, now crushed the pretty blue hair ribbon she'd bought for church, the slate for teaching her beloved students, and her mother's worn cookbook with dreams of making a home. The familiar weight of her Bible provided little comfort as she placed it atop her clothing. Her fingers brushed against Reverend Matthew's telegram, still nestled between its pages. Such truth seemed powerless against Haskett's cruel lies. Christian had left before dawn, as was his habit lately. Sasha straightened the small room one last time, smoothing the blanket on her cot, arranging the tin cups just so. She paused at the door, taking in the simple space that had briefly felt like home. With trembling fingers, she pinned a note to the table. Thank you for your kindness. I cannot bring more trouble to your door. God bless you. Sasha, the morning air held a hint of spring warmth as she stepped onto the packed earth of the yard. Her carpet bag felt heavy, though it contained so little. The walk to town stretched before her, a path she had traveled so often with hope, now leading her toward retreat. She had gone perhaps a quarter-mile when the sound of running feet and young voices broke the morning quiet. Miss Bethany. Miss Bethany. Wait. Her heart clenched as she turned to see a group of children from her school corner racing toward her. Little Maria, half Apache and swift as a deer, reached her first, dark braids flying. Tommy, the telegram boy, was close behind, followed by several others, the children that proper folks often overlooked. You can't go, Maria cried, catching hold of Sasha's skirt. Please don't leave us. Tommy's face was flushed from running. We saw you with your bag. Sarah's pa said, you're taking the noon train. Children, Sasha began, her voice catching. I have to go. You know what people are saying about me? They're lying. This from Joseph, a mestizo boy whose quick mind delighted in sums. Just like they lie about us being stupid because we're mixed. Maria pressed closer. You're the only one who treats us like we matter. The only teacher who wants us to learn. The other children crowded around, their small hands clutching at her skirts, their faces upturned with trust and need. Sarah, usually so shy, spoke up. When I couldn't read good, you didn't laugh. You helped me, real patient-like. You tell us we're smart, Tommy added. That God loves all his children the same. Sasha knelt in the dust of the road, her carpet bag forgotten as small arms wrapped around her neck. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she gathered them close, breathing in the simple, honest love they offered. You teach us about truth, Joseph said solemnly. About standing firm when people are mean. Was that just words? His question pierced her heart like an arrow of conviction. These children, who faced scorn and prejudice daily, were told they were less than others they had learned from her about dignity and courage. Now they were teaching those lessons back to her. Maria's small hand touched her wet cheek. Stay, Miss Bethany. Please stay. Sasha looked into their earnest faces, seeing reflected there everything she had tried to instill: hope, worth the courage to stand firm in truth. How could she abandon them to prove the gossips right? What message would her flight send to these precious souls who needed to see that goodness could triumph over lies? She gathered them closer, her voice stronger now. Do you remember what we read about David? How he faced Goliath when everyone else ran away. Because he knew God was with him, Tommy exclaimed. That's right, Sasha smiled through her tears. And God is with us too, isn't he? Even when people say mean things that aren't true. The children nodded eagerly, hope brightening their faces. Then perhaps, she said slowly, I need to be like David, to stand firm in truth. No matter how big the giant of lies might seem, you'll stay. Maria's dark eyes shone. Sasha rose to her feet, brushing dust from her skirts. Yes, my dears, I'll stay. Their cheers echoed across the morning air as they danced around her. Relief and joy spilling over in laughter and hugs. She let them carry her carpet bag back to the shack, their chatter filling the morning with plans for lessons and stories they still wanted to hear. The day passed in a blur of teaching and encouragement. The children's faith in her had awakened something stronger than fear in her heart. Even the sideways glances from townspeople couldn't shake her newfound resolve. As evening approached, Sash lit the lamp in Christian's shack, its warm glow pushing back the gathering shadows. She moved with purpose, preparing a simple supper of beans and cornbread. The familiar tasks anchored her, reminding her that truth was as steady as the seasons, as reliable as the sun's rising. The crunch of boots on gravel announced Christian's return. He paused in the doorway, surprise flickering across his features at finding her there. Mud caked his boots, and weariness lined his face from long hours in the saddle. Sasha turned from the stove to face him, her back straight, her eyes steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. I will not run from lies, she said clearly. Christian's gaze met hers, searching. Something shifted in his expression as he took in her quiet strength, her determination to stand firm even in pain. He had expected to find the shack empty, she realized. Instead, he found her choosing to face the storm rather than flee before it. He moved into the lamplight, his silence thoughtful rather than heavy. As he washed up at the basin, Sasha continued, preparing their meal, her movements sure and purposeful. When she set his plate before him, the simple act felt like a declaration of courage, of truth, of choosing to remain despite all that sought to drive her away. The children came after me this morning, she said softly, sitting down across from him. They reminded me that truth matters more than comfort, that standing firm can teach more than running away. Christian's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Reckon those young ones see clear sometimes, he said, his voice rough with understanding, clearer than most grown folks. They do, Sasha smiled gently. They see past the lies people tell about them. They taught me to do the same. The lamp flickered, casting warm light across the simple table where they sat, two souls wounded by life yet choosing to face tomorrow with courage. Outside, a whippoorwill called into the gathering night, its song a reminder that even in darkness, Hope remained. The morning sun cast long shadows across. Sasha's small writing desk really just a plank balanced on two barrels as she smoothed out a fresh sheet of paper. Her hand trembled slightly as she dipped the pen in ink. But her determination steadied her strokes. Dear Reverend Harrison, I write to you from San Miguel with an urgent request. Though I have found purpose here teaching the children, cruel rumors threaten my standing and ability to serve. Would you kindly send certified letters attesting to my character and service at the Boston Mission? My heart breaks that such proof is needed, but I must think of the children who depend on my teaching. ... double quotes. She paused, watching a drop of ink spread on the page like a tear. Through the window, she could see Christian riding out to check the cattle, his broad shoulders set against the morning light. The distance between them these past weeks felt wider than the prairie itself. Finishing the letter, she sealed it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. The walk to town would be long, but worth every step if it could help silence the whispers that followed her like shadows. Days stretched into weeks as she waited for a response. Each morning, she gathered her worn Bible and primer books, making her way to the church corner where her small flock of students waited. Some days, only 3 or 4 children came, their parents swayed by gossip. But those who remained showed a hunger for learning that sustained her through the hardest moments. Sounded out slowly, she encouraged Tommy one afternoon, her finger tracking beneath the words. Remember how we practiced? The Lord is my shepherd, he read carefully, face scrunched in concentration. The other children leaned in, eager to help their friend master the passage. Maria clutched her slate, already working ahead on her letters. Miss Bethany, when I learn good enough, can I teach my little sister? Of course, dear one. Sasha squeezed the girl's shoulder. Teaching others is one of the finest ways to show love. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Christian's horse tethered near the broken corral. He had been appearing there more often lately, though he rarely spoke. The steady rhythm of his hammer rang out as he replaced rotted fence posts, mended rails, worked quietly in the background of their lessons. The children noticed too. Mr. Boone's fixing everything, Joseph whispered one day. My PA says he ain't never seen him spend so much time in town before. Sasha's heart quickened at the words, but she kept her voice steady. Then we should be grateful for his help. Now, back to your reading. One evening, a sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Sasha decided to hold lessons by lantern light. Several of the older children worked as ranch hands during daylight hours, and she wanted to give them a chance to learn too. She arranged 3 lanterns in a triangle, creating a pool of golden light. The children settled on blankets spread over the packed earth, their faces eager in the warm glow. Opening her Bible, she began teaching them the 23rd Psalm, helping them sound out the ancient words of comfort. Christian had been working late, replacing hinges on the corral gate. He paused in his task, watching the scene before him. Sasha knelt among the children, her gentle voice carrying on the evening air as she guided them through the verses. Her patience seemed endless, her faith undimmed despite all she had endured. Something stirred in his chest, an ache he had been trying to ignore. He remembered how she looked that first day on the train platform, standing tall despite her humiliation. How she had brought warmth and order to his sparse cabin. How she faced each new slight with grace, never letting bitterness take root. And he had failed her. Had withdrawn into silence when the rumors started, letting fear of losing his land overcome his instinct to defend her. The shame of it sat heavy in his gut. But watching her now, surrounded by children who looked at her with such trust, he felt his walls beginning to crack. Without conscious thought, he found himself spending more time near the school corner, fixing what needed fixing, offering his silent support in the only way he knew how. Sasha noticed every repair, every quiet act of protection. Her heart lifted when she saw fresh timber replaced where the fence had rotted. new hinges gleaming where old ones had rusted through. Though Christian rarely spoke directly to her now, his actions spoke of care, of regret, of something deeper neither of them dared name. One morning, a letter arrived from Boston. Sasha's hands shook as she broke the seal, hope rising as she read Reverend Harrison's words, "To whom it may concern. I write to affirm the sterling character and devoted service of Miss Sasha Bethany during her 3 years teaching at our Boston mission. Her work with children of all backgrounds showed remarkable patience, wisdom, and Christian charity. She maintained the highest standards of moral conduct while in our employ." Double quotes, the letter continued, accompanied by certified documents from the church board and several prominent Boston families whose children she had tutored. Tears blurred her vision as she read their glowing testimonials. That evening, she worked late at the school corner, copying Bible verses for the next day's lesson. The spring air had grown cool, and she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Footsteps approached Christian's familiar tread. He had been mending the hitching post, though the task had been finished hours ago. She felt his presence behind her, solid and steady as the mountains on the horizon. "You ought not be out here alone so late," he said quietly, his first direct words to her in days. Sasha turned, meeting his troubled gaze. "The children who work the ranches can only come after sunset. I won't deny them the chance to learn." Christian shifted, his hat in his hands. I could fix up some better lights. Make it safer for teaching after dark." "Thank you," she whispered, her heart swelling at this small offering of care. "I received letters today from Boston. Proof of my character, if anyone cares to see truth over lies." He nodded slowly, something like pain crossing his features. "Shouldn't need proof. Should have stood up for you proper from the start." Before she could respond, he turned away, moving back to his tools. But he didn't leave, instead beginning work on a new project, fashioning brackets to hold more lanterns, she realized. The steady ring of his hammer filled the gathering darkness, a rhythm that felt almost like hope. Sasha returned to her lesson plans, a small smile touching her lips. Sometimes the greatest steps toward healing came not in grand gestures, but in quiet acts of presence, in the simple choice to remain, to rebuild, to light the darkness one lantern at a time. The stagecoach rattled into San Miguel on a crisp spring morning, dust billowing behind its wheels. Pastor Willard stood waiting at the depot, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. When the driver tossed down the mail pouch, the pastor's eyes lit up at the sight of several thick envelopes bearing Boston postmarks. "Miss Bethany's letters," he murmured, touching the carefully addressed parcels. His boots kicked up little puffs of dust as he made his way toward the church corner where Sasha taught her morning lessons. The children were gathered around her, slates balanced on their knees, when Pastor Willard approached. Sasha looked up from helping Maria form her letters, her face brightening at the sight of the envelopes in his hands. "They've come at last," the pastor said softly, extending the stack toward her. Sasha's hands trembled as she took the letters. "3 weeks of waiting," she whispered. The children gathered closer, sensing the importance of the moment. "Take your time with them," Pastor Willard advised. "Perhaps read them in private first." Sasha nodded, tucking the precious envelopes into her skirt pocket. "Thank you for bringing them straight away." She turned to her students, managing a steady smile. "Let's finish our lesson, children. Then I have some important reading to do." Later that afternoon, alone in the quiet of the church, Sasha carefully opened the first envelope. The familiar letterhead of her Boston church brought tears to her eyes. As she read, they spilled freely down her cheeks. "Miss Sasha Bethany served our congregation with unwavering dedication," wrote Reverend Matthews. "Her character stands as a testament to faithful, honest, and pure Christian virtue. In 3 years of teaching our children, she demonstrated the highest moral principles and genteel comportment. Similar Testimonies filled page after page from church elders, from the Ladies' Aid Society, from respected families whose children she had taught. Each letter spoke of her integrity, her devotion to teaching, her exemplary conduct. The church door creaked open, and Pastor Willard entered quietly. Finding Sasha weeping over the letters, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The Lord provides what we need," he said softly. "Will you share these with the congregation on Sunday?" Sasha wiped her eyes, straightening her shoulders. "Yes," she replied. "It's time for truth to be heard." Sunday dawned clear and bright. Sasha sat in her usual back pew as the congregation filed in, the letters secure in her pocket. Her heart pounded when Pastor Willard called her forward after his sermon. The floorboards creaked under her feet as she made her way to the front. Turning to face the gathered townspeople, she drew a deep breath. Christian sat near the door, his eyes fixed on her with quiet intensity. "Many of you have heard rumors about my character," she began, her voice trembling but growing stronger. "Today, I have letters from my Boston church family that speak to the truth." The congregation sat in complete silence as she read each testimony. Sunlight streamed through the windows, dust motes dancing in the golden beams. Even the children sat still. Sensing the weight of the moment, Mr. Haskett's scoff echoed from his seat near the front when she finished. "Letters can be forged," he muttered, but Elder Thompson shushed him sharply. "These bear official seals," Elder Thompson declared, examining one of the papers. "And speak with one voice about Miss Bethany's character." Other elders nodded, passing the letters among themselves with growing approval. After the service, several mothers approached Sasha, their faces warm with sympathy and regret. "My Tommy's reading has improved so much since you started teaching him," Mrs. Anderson said, squeezing Sasha's hand. "We should have stood by you sooner. Sarah talks about your lessons all the time," added Mrs. Carter. "You've been such a blessing to our children." Each kind word helped heal another crack in Sasha's heart. She watched the families leave, noting how they walked past Mr. Haskett without acknowledgement. His influence clearly diminished. The sun was setting when she finally returned to Christian's cabin. She found him already there, stoking the stove fire for their evening meal. The familiar scent of coffee filled the small space. Christian moved about the kitchen with quiet purpose, setting out 2 plates, serving up the simple supper he'd prepared. When they sat down together, he cleared his throat softly. "You were braver than me today," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Standing up there, facing everyone, he stared down at his plate. "While I've been hiding in my fear of losing the land," Sasha felt tears well up again. But these were different tears of gratitude for his honest words. "Your kindness gave me strength," she replied. "When you offered shelter that first day, and no one else would." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the evening light fading outside the windows. The truth of her past was finally known, her reputation beginning to mend. And here, in this simple cabin, with this quiet man, Sasha felt the first real stirrings of belonging since stepping off that train so many weeks ago. The soft clink of spoons against plates filled the peaceful quiet. Outside, a meadowlark's evening song drifted through the air. Within these walls, something shifted like ice breaking up on a spring river. Moving slowly toward warmth and possibility, the morning sun beat down on San Miguel's dusty Main Street, drawing sweat from beneath collars and hat brims. Christian tied his horse outside the livery stable, planning to have the smith check a loose shoe. The familiar sense of hay and leather drifted from the shadowy interior. Before he could step inside, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Well, if it isn't the soft-hearted rancher himself." Christian turned slowly to face Mr. Haskett. The banker stood in his pressed suit, a sneer twisting his thin lips. Several townspeople paused their morning errands, sensing the tension crackling between the two men. "Nothing to say, Boone." Haskett's voice carried across the street. Just like yesterday in church, sitting quiet while your woman did all the talking. Christian's hands curled into fists at his sides, but he kept his voice level. Miss Bethany spoke truth. That's all that matters. Truth. Haskett barked out a laugh. Truth is, you're weak. Too weak to defend your land. Too weak to stand up to gossip. He stepped closer, his polished boots clicking against the wooden walkway. A real man would have done something by now. The crowd grew larger. Whispers rippled through the onlookers as they formed a loose circle. Across the street, Sasha emerged from the general store, her basket of school supplies forgotten in her arms as she took in the scene. Christian's jaw tightened. The old rage that had been building these past weeks rose in his chest like a storm. His knuckles whitened as he clenched his fists harder. "Come on, Boone," Haskett taunted. "Show us what you're made of. Or are you afraid of getting your hands dirty?" The banker's words hung in the hot morning air. Christian felt every eye upon him, felt the weight of expectations that a man should fight for his honor, should answer insults with violence. He could see the path before him, clear as day. One swing would wipe that smirk off Haskett's face, would prove he wasn't weak. But then he caught sight of Sasha watching from across the street, her face pale with concern. He remembered her quiet strength as she'd stood in church. Fighting lies with truth rather than force, Christian unclenched his fists deliberately, each finger relaxing with purpose. "Truth doesn't need my fists," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the silence. A murmur went through the crowd. Elder Thompson, standing near the front, nodded slowly in approval. "What's that supposed to mean?" Haskett demanded, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "It means," Christian continued, "that Miss Bethany proved her character with honest words and good deeds. While you, double quotes, he paused, meeting Haskett's gaze steadily. "You spread lies about an innocent woman to steal my land." Someone in the crowd muttered, "He's right about that." Haskett's face reddened. "You can't prove those letters proved plenty." Mrs. Anderson spoke up from the gathering. "And we've all seen how Miss Bethany teaches our children with patience and kindness." "While you," added Mr. Carter. The shopkeeper had been mighty quick to spread tales without proof. Haskett glanced around. Seeing the turned faces, the crossed arms, the shaking heads, his carefully cultivated influence was crumbling before his eyes. "This isn't over." "Boone," he spat, but the threat sounded hollow. He turned on his heel and strode away, his shoulders stiff with wounded pride. The crowd began to disperse, but not before several people clapped Christian on the shoulder or nodded in respect as they passed. The smith emerged from his stable, grinning. "That was something to see, Mr. Boone. Now, about that loose shoe, across the street." Sasha clutched her basket tighter, her heart full of pride and something deeper, something that made her breath catch in her throat. The day passed in a blur of ordinary tasks. Christian tending his cattle, Sasha teaching her students. But something had shifted in the town's attitude. People who had once whispered behind their hands now offered friendly greetings. The weight of scandal seemed to lift like morning fog burning away in sunlight. Evening found them in the cabin, the lamp casting warm light across the simple table where they sat after supper. Christian stared into his coffee cup, unusual tension in his shoulders. "You showed real courage today," Sasha said softly. Christian's hands tightened around his cup. "Wasn't courage," he replied. Was tired of fighting shadows, he fell silent, then added so quietly she almost missed it. "Been fighting them since Sarah died." Sasha held her breath, knowing this was the first time he'd spoken his late wife's name aloud to her. After she passed, Christian continued, his voice rough, "I thought if I kept to myself. Worked the land, stayed away from folks, couldn't be hurt again." He drew a shaky breath. "But then you came." And I saw you facing down every cruel word with grace. And I realized, ... double quotes, he trailed off, struggling with the words. What did you realize? Sasha prompted gently. That I've been afraid. The admission seemed to cost him dearly, not of Haskett or losing the land. Afraid of hope. Afraid of ... double quotes, he swallowed hard. Of caring for someone again. Of being broken like that again. The lamp flickered, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Outside, a whippoorwill called into the gathering dusk. Sasha sat very still, her heart aching for the pain in his voice. When Sarah died, Christian went on. It felt like the world ended. Took everything I had just to keep breathing, keep working. Easier to wrap myself in silence than risk feeling that again. He looked up finally, meeting her eyes. But watching you these past weeks, your strength, your faith, even when folks turned against you, made me question whether I've been living at all, or just hiding. Sasha moved without thinking, reaching across the table to place her hand gently over his. His fingers were rough from ranch work, but they trembled slightly under her touch. They sat there in the lamplight, connected by that simple gesture, while the evening deepened around them. No words were needed, just the quiet understanding that sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting, but opening your heart to the possibility of love again. Despite knowing how much it might hurt, through the cabin's small window, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The whippoorwill called again, a lonely sound that somehow didn't seem so lonely anymore. And in that moment, surrounded by the gathering night and the warm lamplight, two hearts began to heal. The town hall stood quiet in the morning light as the elders filed in, their faces grave. Wooden chairs scraped against the floor as townsfolk settled in, whispering amongst themselves. At the front table sat Elder Thompson, Elder Brooks, and Pastor Willard. Their weathered faces illuminated by sunlight streaming through dusty windows, Christian and Sasha entered together, her letters clutched in trembling hands. Mr. Haskett sat near the front, his usual smirk replaced by a tight-lipped frown. We're here to address serious matters, Elder Thompson began, his deep voice filling the room. Accusations have been made against Miss Bethany's character and Mr. Boone's land claim. Miss Bethany, would you share those letters again? Sasha stepped forward, unfolding the papers with care. Her voice grew stronger as she read the testimonials from her Boston church, speaking of her years teaching Sunday school and her devoted service to the congregation. Furthermore, she added, meeting the elders' eyes, I have written confirmation of my employment history. I have never worked anywhere but the schoolhouse and church. Elder Brooks leaned forward. Mr. Haskett, you claim to have evidence to the contrary. Present it now. The banker shifted in his chair. That is to say, my sources, ... double quote sources. Pastor Willard's normally gentle voice held steel. Or fabrications. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Haskett's face reddened as he fumbled through his papers. This land claim, Elder Thompson held up the document, rests entirely on accusations of impropriety. Accusations now proven false. He turned to Christian. Mr. Boone, you've worked this range honest and hard for 15 years. No man here can say different. Mrs. Anderson stood up from her seat. My Tommy never read a word before Miss Bethany came. Now he reads scripture at supper. Other parents nodded in agreement. The evidence is clear, Elder Thompson declared. This claim is invalid, built on slander and dishonesty. He fixed Haskett with a stern gaze. Your behavior brings shame to this community, sir. Haskett shot to his feet, his chair toppling backward. You'll regret this, he snarled, storming toward the door. All of you. The bang of the door echoed through the sudden silence. Then Mary Carter, the shopkeeper's wife, approached Sasha with tears in her eyes. We're the ones who should feel shame, dear. For believing those awful stories, one by one, townspeople came forward to offer apologies and kind words. Christian stood quietly at Sasha's side, his presence steady and sure. The walk home felt different that evening. Spring wildflowers dotted the trail, and meadowlarks called from the fence posts. Christian and Sasha walked side by side, their steps falling into natural rhythm at the shack's doorway. Christian paused. Lamplight from inside cast a warm glow across his face as he turned to Sasha. His eyes held a tenderness she'd never seen before. "Sasha," he said softly, "you were never too good." His voice roughened with emotion. "You were exactly what I needed." The words hung in the gentle evening air, full of promise and possibility. Sasha's heart swelled with joy as she looked up at the man who had defended her honor with quiet strength, who had opened his home, and, slowly, his heart dawn painted the eastern sky in soft rose and gold as Christian tightened the cinch on his saddle. His hands moved with practiced ease, but his heart thundered in his chest. In his pocket, Kay's mother's ring pressed against his leg, a simple gold band that had waited years for this moment. The morning air carried sounds of children's voices as he rode into town. Sasha stood near the church corner where she taught, her face brightening as she spotted him. Several townsfolk paused their morning errands, watching as Christian dismounted and walked toward her with purpose in his stride. The children fell silent as Christian approached. Without hesitation, he dropped to one knee before Sasha, taking her hand in his. "Sasha Bethany," his voice carried clear and strong across the morning quiet. "Your faith and courage have shown me what true love means. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears spilled down Sasha's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." The children erupted in cheers as Christian slipped the ring onto her finger. Pastor Willard, emerging from the church, smiled broadly and offered to wed them the following week. That evening, their small shack glowed with warmth as they shared supper together. For the first time, their laughter rose freely, filling the space with the music of joy and new beginnings. The morning sun blessed San Miguel with golden light as townsfolk gathered at the small white church. Fresh-cut wildflowers adorned every window, their sweet scent drifting on the breeze. The children Sasha had taught sat proudly in the front pew, their faces shining with excitement. Their clothes brushed clean for the occasion. Pastor Willard stood before the altar, his weathered face gentle as he spoke of faith, tested and love proven true. "Today we witnessed not just a union," he said, "but the triumph of dignity over darkness." Christian and Sasha faced each other, their voices clear and strong as they exchanged vows. Christian's hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto Sasha's finger, but his eyes never left hers. After the ceremony, the community spread tables in the churchyard, sharing dishes brought from every kitchen in town. Joy flowed as freely as the lemonade, and laughter rang across the valley as evening approached. Christian led Sasha home to their shack. Outside, children's voices echoed in play, a sweet reminder of the town's promise to build a proper schoolhouse with Sasha as teacher. The couple knelt together in prayer, grateful for God's guidance through their trials. In their window, the lamp cast its warm glow across the valley, a beacon of hope and new beginnings. Thanks for taking a moment to feel with me. If this story reminded you of what matters, hit subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow, continuing our story.